95% coverage is necessary to prevent outbreaks, but globally, 86% of children get the first dose, but fewer than 70% get the second dose. So that really seems to be the crux of it, the idea that we need to push this vaccination into every corner of the world. Question for the panel.
Oh, like it just has to happen. Sue, did you ever get measles when you were young? I got chicken pox, I remember that.
Oh, no, I got everything.
Yeah, well, I've got a feeling
Measles, chicken pox, mumps, but I grew up with this. My father's sister died from measles, so that was like a tragedy, or with the after effects of measles, and that was a huge tragedy in the family that we grew up with, so we were always highly aware of that death can be an outcome of measles.
Yeah, because I remember my poor mother having to have 3 kids at home with... It used to be German measles or English measles. We got through it, but it can't have been fun for her. But what amazes me is that the number of people who are dying from it, it's just extraordinary.
Indeed.
So Sue's absolutely right. The herd mentality, or the herd immunity breaks down. If sufficient numbers don't do it.
It's seeing our understanding that we are actually animals, and at times we are the same. If we understand that, and that to have immunity from cholera or polio or many terrible diseases of the past and present, we have to accept that vaccination across the population is necessary.
Yes.
All right, very quickly to finish on, let's talk grammar. Yay. The apostrophe and its powerful use will not die. A piece in The Conversation contends. Earlier this week, there were reports all over the news sites that the Apostrophe Protection Society, an organisation set up to preserve the correct use of this much-abused punctuation mark, had been disbanded even. Retired journalist John Richards said after 18 years, ignorance and laziness had won and the organisation would be shut down. But the overwhelming coverage of its demise has seen a massive increase in traffic to the website, and he's promised to open it again in the new year. It's argued that the apostrophe survival is important and really not that tricky to get your head around. The problem apparently is not underuse but overuse. An errant apostrophe, for example, on a supermarket sign for mangoes. My real question here, though, is whether you understand, Chris Finlayson, why people get so incensed about the apostrophe's misuse.
Well, I get incensed because I've seen those signs in supermarkets. I've seen them in newspapers like the Dominion Post. That's before you get grown about the content of the Dominion Post. But really, the tests aren't too hard. And I learnt all this stuff, as did Sue, no doubt, when we were in primary school. And I just can't understand what the fuss is about. But the apostrophe's gone. The comma, I mean, the old rule was commas hunt in pairs. No one understands that anymore. So we're basically going to the dogs. But the final word should rest with the MA in Mandarin.
Yes, Sue, are you a pedant? What are your thoughts on this?
I'm afraid so. As my friends and colleagues from various workplaces will tell you, I've spent my life fighting a battle for the correct use of the apostrophe and the comma. You've got the linguists on today for some reason.
Yeah. No, it's great. No. What about the semicolon, though? No one knows how to use them, do they?
No one knows the semicolon, but we could
good.
start on that. But I've already made a fool of myself declining things in Latin, so I won't go there. See you later, Sue.
Lovely stuff.
Yeah, see ya.
Excellent. No, it's been a real pleasure having you on, Chris Finlayson and Sue Bradford, both former MPs. It's been lovely, and thank you to the listeners as well. Now we're going to Checkpoint. Have a great weekend. Bye now.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E Haere Akine, the minister and the musician who fell out of tune over an immigration case. Chris Whaafoi gets a telling off and is forced to apologise to the Prime Minister after his op shop mate hit him up for a favour and he didn't exactly say no. It's day 2 of Samoa's immunisation blitz. The measles death toll sits at 65 and Checkpoint's granted exclusive access to one of the hospital measles wards. An American doctor warns infectious diseases are a greater risk to the world than terrorism. And back home, the coroner launches an investigation into 4 deaths linked to an epilepsy medication. And things are less than peachy in the US as impeachment looms.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. Cabinet Minister Chris Foy has apologised to the Prime Minister for his dealings with a friend over his stepfather's immigration case, but will not resign. Yesterday, messages between him and the op shop frontman Jason Kerrison were leaked, showing the Minister promised to speak to people who could speed the immigration process up. Here's our political reporter Charlie Drever.
Chris Foy says in hindsight he should have been clear and said he couldn't help and told Jason Kerrison to deal with his local MP. Mr Foy says he wasn't doing anything to advance the case and the messages just reflect him not wanting to let a friend down. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she has confidence in Mr Foy, but she has told him she expects better of him. From Parliament, ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
Kura residents are devastated at the loss of a man fatally shot by the police last night. The police were called to the man's address following threats of suicide, and he was shot after confronting officers with a firearm. Timothy Brown reports.
The man, who's not been officially identified, was shot once after confronting armed police officers just before midnight. He was flown to Dunedin Hospital by helicopter, but died early this morning. Residents of Freyberg Avenue, where the man lived, say he lived alone and kept to himself, but was friendly, well known, and will be a big loss to the community. His son also lives in Kudo, and locals say he is friendly and community minded, like his father. Locals are struggling to comprehend what happened last night. The police say the matter is now being investigated by detectives, the coroner and the Independent Police Conduct Authority. In Kudo, Timothy Brown.
The Police Commissioner says a fatal shooting by the police is an outcome no officer wants. Mike Bush said he wouldn't comment on the specific incident, but he said using a firearm is not a decision that any officer takes lightly, and the consequences stay with them for the rest of their lives. He says in a very small number of cases, officers are forced to take action to protect the public and themselves. A Wanaka community leader says residents are well prepared and supported for any flooding. Lake Wanaka has risen significantly over the past week, surpassing the Regional Council's flood alert threshold earlier today. Fences are being erected to prevent people from entering the floodwater, and sandbags block most low-lying shop entrances. Queenstown Deputy Mayor Callum McLeod says the community is doing everything it can to be in a good position ahead of the flood. He says morale is good in the town.
Everyone under the age of 16, this is quite an exciting event. You get kids coming around in wellies and wet weather gear and splashing in the puddles, and it's all quite exciting. If you're affected by it, it's obviously not. For the rest of the town, it's business as usual. The visitors are like, I can't go climbing, but I'm going down to have a look at the flood.
Callum McLeod. There have now been 63 measles-related deaths in Samoa, with one fatality in the last 24 hours. There were now more than 4,300 measles cases reported since the outbreak started, including 140 in the past 24 hours. The latest figures come as the country continues its two-day mobile vaccination campaign, which involves a nationwide daytime curfew. NZ bus services in Auckland will not operate from tomorrow due to industrial action. The company says drivers who continue to participate in the action, which involves the drivers refusing to collect fares, will be suspended from tomorrow. Auckland Transport says the unions have not accepted the latest pay offer from NZ Bus and have not agreed to withdraw the strike notice for not collecting fares. Services along Dominion, Sandringham, Mount Eden and Manukau roads, as well as other routes across the wider Auckland region, and the Link services will not be operating. Bus services operated by other companies will continue as scheduled. A former top rugby player plans to donate his brain to science when he dies to help researchers discover the link between repeated head impacts and brain disease. New Zealand's only brain bank is launching new research to find out more about the impact of concussion in sport on the human brain. The New Zealand Sports Human Brain Bank initiative is asking contact sport players to donate their brains when they die to help with the research. Former junior All Black John Williams says he doesn't remember any of his rugby career. He says his brain will be donated.
I am not the only one, and there's a lot of people, a lot of blokes that play rugby are wondering what's going on, and until I finally found somebody that answered some of the questions, you'd suddenly realise that if you don't speak up and you don't do this and you don't donate, that nothing will ever happen.
Former junior All Black John Williams. It's 5 past 5. Despite indicating he'd never play for the club again, the Breakers have relented and included troubled American import Glenn Rice Jr. in their lineup for their Australian National Basketball League match tonight against the Taipans and Cairns. Last month, Rice appeared in court on an assault charge and the club indefinitely suspended him, with club owner Matt Walsh saying it would be unlikely if Rice played again. But Basketball Australia's Integrity Unit has now cleared the way for him to return, and the Breakers have included him in their lineup. The Breakers have yet to win a game away this season. They have just 3 wins in 11 matches and currently sit second to last in the competition. An Australian Super Netball coach is calling for a return of the Trans-Tasman competition. Collingwood Magpies coach Rob Wright is heading to Nelson for the Super Club tournament starting this weekend, where his side will become the first Australian club to participate in the 3rd edition of the event. New Zealand's 6 ANZ Premiership teams will be on court, along with the Magpies and Wasps from England. In 2016, the 10-team Trans-Tasman ANZ Championship was scrapped, and Wright says he misses those games.
So I just think it gave a different perspective. You got to play different styles. I was broken-hearted, I reckon, when we split. It was a fantastic comp and I loved it. I would love it to be the opportunity to have it back, but, I'm not sure in the short term whether that's ever going to happen.
Rob Wright. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life continues to track 12 months in the life of the organic vineyard of John Douglas. Has the Pinot Noir survived the frosts from earlier in the year? Rob Ruha and the Black Quartet are our Friday Night Live act. And because we're discussing the element europium with Nadine van der Hayden, we've got a sonic tonic dedicated to Brexit. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, don't leave home till you're left the country. Afternoon news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taumaranui, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Low cloud morning and night, isolated afternoon and early evening showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms. Whanganui, Manawatu, Horowhenua, Taihape and Gisborne through to Hawke's Bay, mainly fine, increasing high cloud tomorrow. Taranaki, Kapiti and Wellington, cloudy periods, patchy drizzle morning and night, some rain late tomorrow. Bulla and Nelson, mainly fine tonight, rain with heavy falls spreading from the southwest tomorrow morning. Westland, Fiordland, also Canterbury High Country and Otago Lakes. Rain with heavy falls, thunderstorms at times, turning to showers tomorrow morning and clearing east of the main divide. Wairarapa, Marlborough and the remainder of Canterbury, increasing high clouds, scattered rain developing tomorrow. Central Otago, Dunedin, Clutha and Southland, scattered showers. Chatham Islands, mainly fine tonight, cloudy with patchy drizzle tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. He was stupid and dumb. Cabinet Minister Chris Whāwhoi has refused to resign, but he has said sorry to the Prime Minister this afternoon over his poor handling of a family friend's immigration case. Mr Whāwhoi says he was stupid to give his old friend and op-shop musician Jason Kerrison the impression he would help his stepfather's bid for residency, when in fact he was doing nothing. And as Bridget Burke reports, the Minister admits while he was untidy and dumb, he didn't do anything wrong.
Minister Chris Whāwhoi apologising a short time ago to the Prime Minister after promising to fast-track an immigration case for old family friend Jason Kerrison.
Earlier today, I met with the Prime Minister and apologised to her for the way in which I had dealt with the immigration issue that Jason Kerrison raised with me in August this year. And as a result, I got a stern talking to.
It follows revelations the op-shop singer contacted Mr Whāwhoi for help after his stepfather's partnership visa application was declined. Jason Kerrison's mother, Jude, married Kenyan citizen Gitonga Obadia in 2017 after meeting him online 8 years earlier. Ms Kerrison lives here and her husband in Kenya, but she visits him often and Mr Kerrison became increasingly frustrated after immigration officials questioned the legitimacy of their relationship. Facebook messages released by Minister Whāwhoi this afternoon show Mr Kerrison made contact first on August 5th.
Hi bro, I need your help. My mum's husband has been denied a visitor's visa. They've been in love for 10 years. They married in Kenya almost 2 years ago. I was there as a witness. Can you direct me to someone who can help her immediately? I've never heard her so upset in my adult life, mate. I'd never usually ask anything, but it's my mum.
Jason Kerrison goes on to give the Minister the application number for his stepfather's visa application and apologises for freaking out. The Minister responds the same day.
All good, bro. I think someone from my office is trying to make contact.
Jason Kerrison's response?
Legend.
On October 5th, Jason Kerrison makes a personal Facebook post tagging a Newshub journalist and his mother Jude. He thanks Newshub for bringing attention to his mother's plight and also tags the Minister, calling for him to clean this mess up. He says the optics look terrible, but it's the right thing to do. He finishes the post by saying his whānau is waiting at the border. He then messages the Minister again directly on Facebook.
Hey man, just FYI, I've copied you into a Facebook post re the INZ decision against Mum and her husband. Hadn't heard from anyone in your office since I last brought it up. Really hoping you can help, bro. Kiro.
The Minister responds.
Hey, bro, I'll make a call on Monday. I know it's genuine as I know you travelled for the wedding a few years back. I'll talk to the people that can speed things up.
The Facebook messages continue, with Jason Kerrison continuing to ask the Minister for updates. This on October 11.
Hi, bro. Just checking in. Any news I can pass on? How about the ABs in Italy game, eh?
The Minister responds.
Bro, I have a plan, but it can't be plastered all over Facebook. Unfortunately, this kind of thing can happen, so I'm going to enlist the help of an MP up your way. If I deal with it directly, I have a conflict of interest. A warning, it's not a fast process, but I will need to give you a buzz. Is Matt King your local MP?
Less than a week later, the Minister messages Jason's mother, Jude.
Hi Judy, Chris Farfoy here. Let me know a good time to touch base with you.
She responds 5 days later on October 22nd.
Hi Chris, Jude here. Just asking if you sent me an email related to the questions you had for my application. Just checking in case I missed it. Thank you for your support, Jude.
The Facebook Messenger correspondence continues every few days, but it's mostly one way, with Jason Kerrison asking on November 25th if the Minister has any news for his mother for Christmas, and the Minister reiterating he can't put anything in writing. The messages cease on November 27 with this from Jason Kerrison.
Morena, Chris. Now it's just getting weird, mate. I'll have to assume that non-communication means no follow-up. All good, man. I'm sure you did what you could. I'm going to head back to media for some follow-up action. Cheers.
Cabinet rules state a conflict may arise if people close to a minister, such as whānau or close associates, might derive or be perceived as deriving personal, financial or another benefit from a decision or action by a minister. Today, Mr Farfoy admitting he stupidly gave Mr Kerrison the impression he was following up on the case, when in fact he wasn't.
I said some dumb things, but I did not do the wrong thing. The language was loose as I was communicating with an old friend. After Jason contacted me, I sought advice about how I should deal with the matter. That advice was that I could support Jason's efforts, but I should not advocate for the case, and that his local MP should do that. My records show that on October the 11th, I texted and called Jason to tell him that that was the plan. After that, I immediately called his local MP, Matt King, to ask if he was okay to take the case on. I understand Matt King has confirmed that call this afternoon. I became reluctant to get involved over time because of the number of messages I was receiving from Jason. Some of my responses to those messages were dumb. I was trying to let down a friend easy and not cause conflict. I should have been more direct with Jason that I was not comfortable with his messages or supporting his efforts. I have very high standards for myself, and the Prime Minister has very high standards for her ministers, and I know the public has high standards too. And I know that I have not met all of those in dealing with this issue. I'm happy to take questions.
Did you offer the Prime Minister your resignation?
No, I did offer her my apologies for the way that I dealt with the issue. As I say, I got a stern talking to.
The Prime Minister has accepted Mr Farfoy's apology. She says while she still has confidence in him, his handling of this case was poor. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
To Samoa now, where a volunteer doctor from Hawaii says he has never seen conditions like it inside the country's hospitals, where some are operating at 600% capacity. Lieutenant Josh Green says the measles epidemic and poor vaccination rates pose a greater challenge to the world than terrorism.
I have seen outbreaks like this, small outbreaks, rare cases, but I've never seen anything like this. I went into the small hospital here on the western side of the island that the New Zealand team has been servicing this last couple of weeks. And there were 28 patients with severe cases of measles, and it was unbelievable. It was unlike anything I've seen before, for sure. The extent to which people were devastated by, measles with the rash all over their body and just high fevers, it's really incredible. The hospital was working at 600% higher capacity than normal, 600%, because there were so many sick people. And frankly, there could have been a lot more, I think, who were staying at home just because they're not as sick as the others.
We'll hear more from Lieutenant Josh Green after 6, but 2 days of national shutdown are coming to a close and over 100 vaccination vans are returning to town, many from remote villages. Almost everyone has been staying at home under government emergency orders, but the very sick have been staying in hospital. While most of the 63 deaths have been in Apia, where 144 are in the main hospital, there are also sick kids in the remote district hospitals. Checkpoint was granted exclusive access to the measles ward at Putasi District Hospital, where 4 patients were being treated. Alex Perrottet and Logan Church, who are both fully immunised and wore masks, went inside.
Putasi village is on the south coast of Samoa's main island of Upolu. The hospital was damaged by the earthquake that caused the devastating tsunami 10 years ago. Now, a new crisis has hit the country, but it's hitting in small, deadly waves, and people don't know when it will stop. New mum Filirosa Paviti is at the bedside of her precious newborn baby, wrapped up in a tiny bundle covered in a red rash. Paramount Chief Tuatangaloa Joe Annandale and Nurse Whenumiai Kiribati help to translate.
The baby is only 3 weeks old, but
Yeah, 2 days now admitted and continue our treatments.
So, and how is the baby doing? Is she improving?
Yeah. Drop down the fever and coughing.
Oh, very
and
good.
Still advise the mother for breastfeeding and use the mask for the mother.
Very young, eh? Very tiny, newborn.
Because pneumonia is the big problem, complication. 3 weeks old is very tender. When was the baby admitted?
Yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yeah, there's other children at home. Yeah, but the baby that I delivered in this.
Oh, you delivered?
Yeah.
Oh, she's a midwife.
Yeah. And what's the baby's name?
Camilla. Camilla Elizabeth.
Camilla Elizabeth.
Oh, it's Queen Elizabeth.
It's very regal.
English royalty.
13-year-old Junior Otineru looks exhausted but relieved. He's going home today. His mum Lily is here, but she's at the bedside of her nephew Samuelu Ricky, who is on the mend but still in pain.
1 year and 8 months now. 1 year old and 8 months.
Okay.
He's better now.
Good.
He's better now.
So when was he really bad? Last week?
Last week.
And how did you know? What could you see?
The eyes, very bad. The red inside the eyes. Yeah.
And how are the eyes today?
It's good now. It's good, very good.
Nurse and midwife Whenumiai Kiribati has delivered the region's babies for 20 years. She knows all these faces behind the rash, and she has a motherly concern that they all get well. She's been working around the clock.
The first time when the measles presenting here, we contact the main hospital and we send the patient through the ambulance.
These patients here, the 3-week old baby, how is Camilla Elizabeth doing?
Yes, when the babies and the mother came here yesterday, we give nursing care and also we contact the main hospital. And now we continue treatments.
And is the baby improving?
Yeah.
As we're chatting, another concerned mum walks by with her son, who's also covered in the measles rash and distressed.
They're from Alipata, which is another district further on.
And has he just come in today? Or?
He came, that's what I mean. Thursday.
He doesn't want to be here, but like any kid who sees a camera, there's the tiniest flicker of excitement itching to come out through his rash-riddled body. Whanumi Kiribati says sometimes it's hard to convince people to get their kids vaccinated, and she has to get out on the road herself to tell them it could be the difference between life and death.
Some of the mothers, especially mothers, they don't care about the immunization program, but some of the mothers, they are well educated and they bring over the babies here to continue treatments. And also we go around the village for assessments, and now we found out a lot of some defaulters, and now we bring over here to continue their immunization.
These parents, like so many around the country, have so many questions. Why do their kids have to suffer? And why did so many have to die? They are questions the Prime Minister says he doesn't want to answer yet. But many say his health ministry has made a monumental mistake, one it will have to answer for in court. The government shutdown and official door-to-door vaccinations have finished, but Whanumi Kiribati's work is far from over. And Potasi's royal baby, Camilla Elizabeth Paviti, she's fought hard and won. Her doting midwife has given her the all clear, and she can now go home with mum. In Potasi for Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
And if you were listening to that one on the drive home, we'll put it up on our Facebook page and our webpage so you can look back at the video from Logan and Alex. More pressure is being heaped on Pharmac over its brand switch of epilepsy drugs. The chief coroner has announced she is launching an investigation into 4 deaths linked to Logum, a brand of lamotrigine. Now, Guyon Espiner has been investigating this issue for RNZ and joins us now. Guyon, we'll talk about the chief coroner's investigation soon, but there are some new developments on this with more information coming from MedSafe. Now, what are they saying?
Well, MedSafe today, after that coroner's release about her inquiry, put a release out saying some medicines need to be prescribed by brand. Now, this can only be seen as a challenge to Pharmac, really. It's talking about the fact that some conditions have what they call a narrow therapeutic window. In other words, they're quite finely balanced conditions, and for those you should avoid changing brands wherever possible, as there is a risk of destabilising treatment for these patients. This is what MedSafe is saying in its update for prescribers today.
And just before we move on, we should make it clear. So MedSafe's the one that gives you advice about risks and if there are adverse effects and all the rest of it. Pharmac being the one who dishes out the money for the purchase of
That's
drugs.
right. And you'd have to say on this issue, they are at odds. You'll remember that MedSafe gave the initial advice to Pharmac, don't do this. It's against international best practice of switching epilepsy medicines. It's not worth the risk. You shouldn't do it. Pharmac went ahead anyway. Now we see today this update for prescribers. It's an update for prescribers. This is what they've released. They specifically mention lamotrigine, and they say that MedSafe recommends that prescribers follow the UK Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency advice on brand switching for lamotrigine. And that advice says, I've looked at this many times, that says only switch your anti-epileptic medicines on the advice of a specialist. Don't just do it in a broad sweep. So what MedSafe are saying to prescribers in New Zealand is follow the British, the UK advice, not the Pharmac advice in New Zealand. So it's quite an extraordinary state of affairs. And it says that in this MedSafe advice today that there is information to show that patients find this brand change difficult. So a real challenge again from MedSafe, and you can only say that MedSafe and Pharmac are well fell apart on this issue.
So not only does their original advice conflict with Pharmac, they've doubled down on it.
That's exactly it. They have doubled down on it today, absolutely.
So what is the coroner's inquiry going to look at?
Yeah, so the coroner's inquiry is what they call a joint inquiry, and in this respect that means that they group together certain deaths to see whether they happen for the same reason under similar circumstances. So she's saying, Judge Deborah Marshall, Chief Coroner, that it's reached a certain threshold of public interest and public safety that she feels that this warrants that threshold of inquiry. So that's quite a big step today. That will take several weeks, if not months, to come out. I did speak to one of the mothers who has lost her son in a case that may well be linked to this. I mean, there was brand switching going on with this young man. She's keeping her name out of the media for the moment. I did speak to her by phone and have been in contact with another mother who has lost her daughter. They're both welcoming this inquiry. Pharmac also says it welcomes the inquiry. That's what government agencies say when these things happen. And they say they will cooperate fully.
But how damaging is it?
Well, look, this raises the stakes, doesn't it? I mean, let's see what the coroner says. And look, let's repeat again, as we have been. We can't prove, no one can prove that there was a direct causal link between the brand switch and these deaths and the other adverse reactions. But it certainly raises the stakes. If the Chief Coroner finds that these deaths could have been prevented, and you've got MedSafe having said to Pharmac, don't do it, it goes against international best practice, you've got to say that the stakes for the Chief Executive and the board of Pharmac have been significantly raised if it is found that this was linked to their brand switch.
Have we heard anything from the government, the ministers, anyone?
Well, it's interesting because Pharmac has independence, and that's what people like about this model. The politicians aren't really supposed to get involved. I've been talking to the minister's office over the weeks about this. We know that Minister Clark, the health minister, was concerned about it. We know he made signals and there were nudges. We don't think he intervened directly, or even that he's got the power to intervene directly to force Pharmac to do this. But the opposition parties have been fairly quiet on this as well. They all kind of buy into the Pharmac model, which is right behind this because Pharmac needs to free up the money to buy other drugs with it, and that's why they make these brand switches. The question on this one is, have they been too aggressive? Was it too risky to go against MedSafe advice to do this? But it's been something of a political free zone at the moment, and it's the agencies, your MedSafe and now the coroner, who are doing the work pushing into this.
Thanks, Guyon. That's investigative reporter Guyon Espiner. And if you want to see more of Guyon's work on this particular issue, go onto the RNZ website and look in the in-depth section. It is almost 28 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'd love to hear from you if you're one of the people who have had a brand switch with this particular drug. How are you feeling about everything that's going on, the investigation, and what have you done about your medication? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Barriers and sandbags are going up in Wanaka as residents and council staff brace for flooding. Gradually rising water levels are yet to reach the main street, but locals say it's only a matter of time, and they've been busy filling sandbags and taping plastic on shop entrances. Lake Wanaka has already surpassed the regional council's flooding alert of 280 metres, and it may go higher than previously forecast. Our Otago Southland reporter Tess Brunton is in Wanaka, where waves from the lake have been creeping closer to town.
Local fish and chip shop, the Catch Wanaka, had only been open for a few days when the flood warning started. Instead of preparing for the restaurant's first summer, manager Johnny Shea says they were filling up sandbags, taking equipment out and waiting for the water to rise.
We keep thinking that from about 3 days ago that it's going to be here today, and it still hasn't. So, I mean, it's quite morbid really, but it's almost like a slow death really, you know. You sort of know what's going to happen and you can't do any more about it. So it is what it is.
Met Service has a heavy rain warning in place for Otago headwaters that feed into Lake Wanaka, and the town itself has been raining most of the day. Black plastic sheets and sandbags line the shop fronts on Ardmore Street as the water comes closer and closer. Queenstown Lakes District Council Deputy Mayor Callum McLeod says it can be an eerie experience as the levels gradually rise.
Megan Miller, who's our head of corporate services, talked about flooding in this district as being flood by teacup, and it's exactly that. It's a slow creep. It does wear you down a wee bit, especially if you've got an affected business on the lakefront, because you just want it to be gone.
Lake Wanaka will need to drop more than 3 metres to return to normal levels, a feat the Otago Regional Council predicts could take about 19 days of clear skies to achieve. Callum McLeod says half the town is open and trading very well. The other half is closed and preparing very well.
We've had 3 times the volunteers that we need. We've got tasks for them to do. People coming out with cups of coffee and tea and ham rolls for the volunteers. People volunteering storage for space for free for people that are affected, that need to take equipment out. It's the best and the worst, definitely the worst aspect, but it's the great community spirit, and it's community district-wide.
Walking along the receding parkland, Kane John says he's never seen anything like Wanaka's flood. He arrived in town ready for work at the start of the week, but bad weather has put his plans on hold.
It looks like Lake Wanaka has grown by heaps, and there's no lakefront and it's all sticks. So good for the winter, I suppose. Come get some firewood.
Workers are setting up metal fences and removing debris as the town prepares. The sewerage system has been turned off along the main street, which has been closed since yesterday. Otago Regional Council Natural Hazards Analyst Tim van der Woden says wind could play a big factor in flooding.
The wind mainly just can push up and raise the water level, and then debris on top of that. It was lightning. Debris can also cause damage, makes a lot more of more of a mess that needs cleaning up, and the clean up as well.
As a thunderstorm rolls overhead, Wanaka residents and council staff are hoping drier days are on their way. Until then, they'll be waiting for the floodwater to hit.
And our Otago Southern reporter Tess Brunton is in Wanaka and joins us now. Tess, how's the weather been there today?
It hasn't been a particularly good day. We have had rain most of the time in the town, including some that's been quite heavy. And Met Service has also had a heavy rain warning in place for the Otago headwaters that feed into Lake Wanaka. So it has been very damp, and it means that all the staff, the council staff and residents work in sandbagging. I've heard that there's been thousands of bags that have actually been created and then put into the different entrances to shops, particularly along the main street, Ardmore Street. There's also been a lot of work being done to clear debris around the Wanaka lakefront. One contractor told me that yesterday they cleared 7 truckloads of debris. Although when you got there this morning, you couldn't tell because there was so much that had returned. Now, this debris is also, there's a bit of a concern that if there's any wind, that will just be hurled towards the buildings and what impact that could have. So it's been an interesting day, especially with the amount of rain that is still forecast.
Tess, you mentioned the shops there. I mean, it's normally a busy time of the year for people down that way. How are they coping?
Morale is actually quite good, and Deputy Mayor Callum McLeod says that there has been a lot of people volunteering. They've got more than enough volunteers, although they are always willing to accept a few more. But the shop owners I've spoken to say it is quite unnerving because unlike a flash flood, which comes on very suddenly, it's quite unnerving to see a flood and prepare for a flood that's just creeping up day by day. But fortunately, the council has made more sand and sandbags available at all the locations, so in Wanaka, Queenstown, Glenorchy and Kingston, so that there is a bit more support and people feel a bit more secure. In the town itself, we've actually still got Ardmore Street, and it's remained closed, and it's likely to remain closed until the flooding has come and gone. At the moment, there is no water that has actually reached Ardmore Street, but that looks like it's probably going to be changing in the very near future, either later tonight or into the weekend. And it's not just Wanaka that's on high alert. Queenstown is also there's some concerning water levels. It's just below the regional council's flood alert, so there will be people paying a lot of attention and monitoring those levels to make sure that there's not the flooding. But otherwise, it's really just a waiting game down here in Wanaka.
Thanks, Tess. That's Tess Brunton joining us from Wanaka. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, shock and disbelief in the small North Otago town of Kudo after a man is shot dead by police. The brain bank shining new light on the effects of concussion, and the sports stars lining up to donate their grey matter. Wonderland comes to Wellington, the new interactive exhibition bringing Alice's adventures to life. And we'd love your feedback on anything you've heard so far on the program this evening. You can get in touch by text 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And Susanna is standing by with the headlines.
Minister Chris Whakapoi says messages to Jason Kerrison were untidy and dumb. Mr Whakapoi had been contacting the frontman of the band Op Shop about a family immigration issue, saying he was onto it, bro, or on it, bro. The Commerce Minister says, hand on heart, he did not do anything to advance the case and instead contacted Mr Kerrison's local MP, Matt King. The Prime Minister says she would have expected better from Mr Whakapoi but hasn't asked him to resign. Samoa's Prime Minister says good progress has been made in the push to stem the country's measles epidemic. He says more than 20,000 vaccines have been administered by teams visiting households during the 2-day lockdown period. The death toll now stands at 63 and the total number of measles cases has risen to 4,300. Locals in the small North Otago town of Kudo are devastated by the death of a local man who they describe as quiet, friendly and well-liked. The man was shot dead by police last night after he pointed a gun at officers. The police had been called to the house after a man had made threats of suicide. The Police Commissioner Mike Bush says using a firearm is not a decision that any officer takes lightly. 3 people have been killed and 4 others have been injured in a crash on State Highway 1 north of Kaikoura. Helicopters are taking the injured to hospital after the crash involving a car and a truck at Hapuku. 1 person is in a critical condition and 3 have moderate to serious injuries. State Highway 1 is closed between Mangamonu and Hapuku and diversions are in place. A Wanaka community leader says residents are well prepared and supported for any flooding. Lake Wanaka has risen by close to 2.5 metres over the past week, coming close to the peak level recorded in 1999. Fences are being put up to stop people going into the floodwater and sandbags are blocking shop entrances. There is a Met Service heavy rain warning until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and it's time for business now with Nona Peltier. Nona, there is a push to get more retailers to accept PayWave payments. What's behind all of that?
Well, that's the contactless payment. Yeah. So there's all sorts of ways you can pay now just with your card, just tapping it, or other methods which don't require any cash. Now, as we've talked about before, some people prefer just to go without any cash, and it's quite popular in a number of other countries. So the issue is that only 60% of retailers are offering contactless payments, and you can imagine, there's 40% don't. 1 in 10 people will go to a different store if they can't use a contactless payment method, which is, I thought, quite surprising.
Rather than punch in a debit card or an EFTPOS card
exactly.
or something like that.
Exactly.
They can't be bothered punching in a 4-digit number.
Apparently not, no. So they just simply won't shop there. And MasterCard has come out and said, listen, in 2021, we're going to have a lot of big tourism events attracting visitors from all over the world. If you do not have the system in place, people might not shop at your store and you're going to lose an opportunity. Now, I said, well, yeah, but it costs a lot. And they said, yeah, so does the lost opportunity. So it's interesting. They're trying to raise the issue. They're thinking that New Zealand is a big, a country that really likes using contactless and cards and so on. We like paying with those things. So come on, retailers, they're saying hurry up and put this stuff in place. On the other hand, we've run a lot of stories as well about retailers having a very hard time passing on those costs to consumers.
Yeah, I found it really interesting the other day. The local sushi store around here doesn't want real money. Won't take cash. I find that really interesting.
Do they take contactless payments, though?
Yeah, they do. Oh. Okay, so what's happened on the markets today, Nona?
Oh, you're going to be interested in this because I know you love the currency, you know. Yep. Today, our currency rose about 0.25%. Now, 2% increase in the past week. We are now sitting at levels we haven't seen since the Reserve Bank surprised the market in early August with a big drop in the official cash rate to 1%. Now, so at the moment, they're trading at 65.6 US cents. If you're an exporter, you're not going to be very happy about that.
No,
if you're going on a holiday, you might be a little bit more pleased. 95.9 Australian, so pretty high there as well. Stuck still, though, at 49.8 British pence. On the markets, we closed up 18 points and ending the week at 11,276.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with all our numbers and business update. The small Otago township of Kudo is in shock after a well-known local was shot dead during a confrontation with armed police last night. Police were called to the home of the man, whose name has been officially released, over concerns about suicide. He was flown to Dunedin Hospital where he died of his injuries this morning. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown visited the grieving community and filed this report.
Residents of Freyberg Avenue say last night seemed like any other in the quiet cul-de-sac on the edge of Kudo, a small town about 125 kilometres north of Dunedin.
All I heard, I just said to the wife as we were in the room, I said, hello, I said, it sounds like the chopper's coming up. I said, there must be a medical emergency up here like they normally do in the area. But I never heard any sirens or anything prior to that. Didn't see any sirens, any blue lights, red lights or whatever lights. Never heard any gunshots, never heard anything. Didn't know much about it until this morning.
The man, who did not want to be identified, says the victim, a man aged in his 60s, was well known and well liked in the community. He lived alone but has a son who also lives in the town.
He was a quiet person, very friendly. You know, it's a person that you would never think that would do anything like this, so it's just unfortunate.
Other locals say the man was community-minded, as is his son. One woman says Kudo is reeling at the news of the man's death.
Lovely, lovely guy. Not a bad word against him. Absolutely shocking, just an absolute tragedy. Known to everybody. Everybody knows everybody, everybody looks out for everybody. Just unbelievable, it truly is.
Inspector Daryl Sweeney says the police received reports just after 9 o'clock last night that the man was threatening to commit suicide. He says about the same time responding officers were told the man had access to a firearm.
The man was located with a firearm inside the Freyberg Avenue address around 10:50 p.m. At this point, officers were outside the property and able to speak briefly with the man. Back in Dunedin, they had activated the Armed Defenders Squad and a police negotiation team who arrived here at the station. However, unfortunately, 11:50 p.m, the man confronted the police. He was armed with a firearm and he was shot once. The man was given immediate medical attention by our people. A helicopter was called and he was medevaced to Dunedin Hospital. Unfortunately, in the early hours of the morning, he died.
Daryl Sweeney says detectives are investigating the matter, as is the Independent Police Conduct Authority, and the man's death has been referred to the coroner.
To be really clear that a fatal shooting is an outcome that nobody in the police wants, and nor in the community. But unfortunately, this event escalated in front of our people.
Waitaki District Mayor Gary Kircher says it's a tragedy for the tight-knit community of about 300 people.
These sort of situations are always tragedies, and even more so, I think, in a small community like Kudo. So inevitably, pretty much everyone knows everyone else, and you end up with that, really hitting home to so many people.
The Police Commissioner Mike Bush and the Police Association President Chris Cahill have defended the officers' actions, saying no officer takes the decision to use their firearm lightly. Mr. Bush says the consequences will stay with the officers involved for the rest of their lives. A heavy police presence remains in Kudo, and part of Freyberg Avenue is still cordoned off from the public. In Kudo, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
To the US now, where the war of words is reaching fever pitch as Democrats push forward with impeachment charges against President Donald Trump. There's allegations of nervous fits, a descent into madness and good old-fashioned lies. US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has greenlit the drafting of articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump over alleged corruption and abuses of power. I asked CNN's Lauren Fox why things seem to be getting so nasty.
Part of the reason this has become such a divisive issue and the reason that Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, didn't even want to go there for so many months is the fact that you're talking about a president who really makes people divided. The fact is here, the president, since he came into office, has made Republicans, feel like their base is really behind him. And for Democrats, their base has been urging them to do everything that they could to unseat him, to beat him, and in this case, impeach him. Now, I think that Nancy Pelosi eventually changed her tune on this because she viewed this issue with Ukraine as so serious that she didn't really have another choice. But of course, that put some of her moderate members, people who came from districts that the president won in 2016, in a difficult spot. Now, eventually she got to the point where a majority of her caucus supported this, and they're moving forward. And then, of course, we heard from her today that she has instructed the committee chairman to move ahead with drafting articles of impeachment. And obviously that's a very serious escalation.
So, is it going to happen? Because we've heard so many times impeachment is close, so many false starts. Is it really full steam ahead?
Well, right now they are on track to do this before Christmas. And I can lay out a little bit of the timeline here. So today, Nancy Pelosi made that announcement that she wants the chairman to go ahead and move forward drafting articles of impeachment. On Monday, the House Judiciary Committee will have another public hearing where they'll hear a presentation of evidence from lawyers on the Intelligence Committee and on the Judiciary Committee, talking a little bit about what their 2-month investigation found. Then they will have to draft those articles of impeachment. They'll release them publicly, and they will vote on them in committee. The week after, the week before Christmas, that's when the full House of Representatives is on track at this point to vote. Now, there's no guarantee that that's exactly when it will take place, but we are not talking about a few months down the road. We are talking about a matter of weeks, at least in the House process. Now, the Senate, that's a whole other story. And I know that a lot of Senate Republicans, even those people in charge, are sort of waiting very cautiously to see what the House of Representatives does before it moves forward with its part of the process, the Senate trial.
Okay, a couple of things there. When Nancy Pelosi talks about drafting up these articles, she's talking plural articles of impeachment. So how many are you expecting?
Well, I think that we have seen a little bit of a roadmap of what Democrats are thinking about in the House Intelligence Report. That was that 300-page report that came out earlier this week. And 2 of them, I think we have a good, clear indication that it's the direction they're going. One of them, obstruction of Congress. The fact that the House Intelligence Committee really documented what witnesses, what documents they weren't able to obtain because of White House obstruction, I think that gives you a clear sense that they believe they could charge the president with an article of impeachment of obstructing Congress. The other one would be an abuse of power charge, potentially. And that's important because, of course, they have been investigating whether or not the president was using his office in an effort to try to get political dirt on his political opponent, Joe Biden. So that's the other charge. Now, there's a third that's a little bit more contentious because some of those moderate Democrats, again, people who won in districts the president won in 2016, aren't really willing to throw the whole kitchen sink at this. But one of the things you have to remember is that there is this whole Mueller report that came out over the summer, and there are some liberal Democrats who want to include an article of impeachment, perhaps obstruction of justice, that would include some of those charges as well. So that's a little bit up in the air right now in terms of the number of articles of impeachment. Remember, in the Clinton impeachment, Republicans were negotiating how many articles and how to structure the articles up until the very last hours and days before they presented them. So that conversation is going to happen over the weekend. House Judiciary members have been instructed to not go home. They are instructed to stay in town to work through the weekend. So those discussions are ongoing.
So what has President Trump himself been saying about all of this?
Well, President Trump has sort of run the gambit in terms of his view on this. He's, of course, called this a witch hunt the entire time. He says that this is politically motivated. It seemed like he indicated today that he thinks that they should move ahead, get through this impeachment, because he's very confident that the Senate will ultimately acquit him because, again, you'd need 20 Republicans to cross the line and vote with Democrats to actually remove the president from office. But I think the big question is going to be whether or not his lawyers are going to participate at all in this House process. We know they didn't participate Wednesday during the first hearing, but they have until tomorrow to announce whether or not they'll participate at all in this process in the House. So I think that that's a deadline we're waiting for. But, of course, the president will let his thoughts be known via Twitter.
Indeed, he will. So just talking about that timetable that you've laid out for us there, Lauren, if this is going to go, be tabled in the House of Representatives before the end of the year and potentially go before the Senate next year, you've said, well, it seems unlikely that they're going to get the number of Republican votes that they would require to push this through. So what is actually the end goal? Is it just, embarrassing the president by having a trial, or what?
Well, I think that members of the Democratic caucus in the House, their argument right now, when you ask them, well, you know how this is probably going to end. The Senate will acquit him. He won't be removed from office. Why go through this long, arduous process? And what they'll argue is this is about national security. This is about an investigation that found that the president was using his office in order to get his political opponent investigated by a foreign entity. And Democrats have been arguing that that is something that the founders warned against. This is a moment that they cannot just ignore, despite the fact that they know what the political outcome likely will be. That has been the argument that you've heard from Democrats throughout this entire process. And I think that that's something you're going to continue to hear from them on the campaign trail, because people have to go home and explain this to their constituents. I was talking to one Democrat from New Jersey, Tom Malinowski. He's from a swing district, and he told me, I have to go home and explain this to people back home. And what I always tell them when they say, well, why even do this, is I say to them, imagine your house is on fire and you call the fire station and they say to you, we can send a fire truck, but I need a favor, though, which, of course, is that famous line that was in the July 25th phone call between President Trump and Ukraine's President Zelensky. He said that's very serious. Americans would be very frustrated if when they called their fire station, that's the message that they heard. And so I think that that's the argument you're hearing from Democrats. This is too serious to ignore, even though politically it may not have the outcome that some desire.
And that was Lauren Fox from CNN. It's about 8 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Scientists are trying to get ahead of the game and discover how concussions and repeated injuries affect the human brain in sport. New Zealand's only brain bank is asking rugby players and boxers to donate their grey matter for research after they die. Former All Blacks, scientists and students were at the University of Auckland this morning for the launch. Katie Scotcher was there too.
All Black John, or JJ Williams, spent most of his youth on the rugby field, but he doesn't remember any of it.
I can remember certain stuff, but that's all gone. I had a reunion the other day and I didn't know any of the people until they introduced themselves.
He plans to donate his brain to the Sports Human Brain Bank initiative after he dies.
I am not the only one, and there's a lot of people, a lot of blokes that play rugby are wondering what's going on. And until I finally found somebody that answered some of the questions, you'd suddenly realise that if you don't speak up and you don't do this and you don't donate, that nothing will ever happen.
Former All Black Sir Brian Williams experienced his first concussion in 1964.
I'm 13 years old. Game of rugby league versus Mount Roskill. We're winning. The opposition hasn't been beaten for 5 or 6 years. I run low and I step. Then bang.
That was the first of many, and decades later, he says the long-term impact on his brain is now starting to show.
I am concerned. I forget names and where my keys are.
There are more than 700 brains and 450 samples already stored in the bank. But researchers are looking for donors who have played contact sports like rugby, boxing and soccer. The director of the Brain Bank, Sir Richard Fall, will lead the research. He says the families of donors will be at the heart of their work.
They are the most special people in the world. They donate the brains to our brain bank so we can do research on them. And as we find out more about the research, we then feed back those results, we feed back what we found back to the families.
He says for a sports crazy country like New Zealand, the research will be challenging.
There's no sense in getting fit and living longer if you're not don't even know who you are. You've actually got to look after your brain and your body. And so that's what this initiative was all about.
As part of the research, scientists will focus on chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a mysterious degenerative brain disease often experienced by people with a history of repetitive brain trauma. Dr. Chris Nowinski, the Executive Director of the Concussion Legacy Foundation in Boston, says there are lots of unanswered questions about the disease.
We don't know how to treat it. We don't know how to detect it and diagnose it in life. We don't know how to modify, slow, or stop the disease. We don't know additional risk factors, additional risk modifiers. We don't know how it starts or what specific combination of head impacts are sparking the disease. And we don't exactly know how we can prevent it outside of eliminating all head impacts.
Researchers hope their work will lead to new treatments for brain diseases. I tamaki makaurau mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scott Churaho.
Visitors to Te Papa will have the chance to immerse themselves in the psychedelic multiverse of Alice's Wonderland with the opening of a new exhibition. The interactive experience celebrates the screen history of the dozens of films made of Lewis Carroll's classic book from more than 150 years ago. RNZ videographer Dom Thomas and reporter Hamish Cardwell went, of course, down the rabbit hole and filed this report.
Stepping into Wonderland, it's easy to get lost. There are many doors that can take you to many different wild and strange places. The tale's been retold again and again, and a history of its many lives on film is on display at Te Papa in Wellington. From paper strip animation and lantern slides of the Victorian era through stop motion, puppets, cartoons, and CGI extravaganza, the Wonderland exhibition has it all. Sarah Tutton from the Australian Centre for the Moving Image put the show together.
As we sort of looked at the films, we realised that there were so many different interpretations of it, and I suppose because of the story of going into other worlds, it demanded that the filmmakers play with reality and play with visual effects and the special effects, and that we could tell a story about the history of cinema through the eyes of Alice in Wonderland.
The story has penetrated pop culture and has been embraced by those traditionally outside the mainstream, the LGBTQI community and the beatniks and hippies. Plucky, willful and adventurous Alice opened people up to a world of wildness and weirdness.
You know, really before Lewis Carroll, children's literature was about telling you that you needed to behave in a certain way. And Alice doesn't behave how she's told to behave. She is tough and sassy and super smart, and I think that because of that, the story is, I suppose, owned by lots of different communities.
At the Mad Hatter's tea party in an enchanted forest, the table is set with cupcakes and sweets until it turns to desolation and desert, cracked pottery, and then time goes haywire. It's trippy stuff. The chicks, of course, did it weirdest. Ms. Tutton's favourite is the unsettling and surreal version by Jan Schwankmeyer.
I mean, for me, that really appeals, the trippiness of it, and I think it's interesting the different audiences that Alice in Wonderland has had. It's obviously a very beloved children's story, but it also has had, you know, a darker, more surrealist, more trippy life. It's not really just a family audience, it appeals to people who are into, I suppose, curiosity and imagination and that, I suppose, that more surreal world.
Stephanie Gibson from Te Papa says the show's innovation and creativity is a perfect fit for the museum.
So it's incredibly rich in terms of history, art, surrealism, cinema, trickery. It's a really rich experience for people to really get stuck into.
She says children are going to love the interactivity, with secret doorways and hidden drawers to be discovered.
They can become part of the Queen's croquet ground. They can become part of the Mad Hatter's tea party. It's going to be a really great surround sound, digital, immersive experience.
So what do children think?
Pretty awesome. Yeah, it's real awesome. It's really cool. It's
Yeah?
It's really creative.
Some of this stuff, to me, is scary. How do you find it? Do you find it to be a little scary?
A few Alice's are a bit scary looking, yeah. Well, yeah, that's basically what I think. Oh yeah, the cat. A cat just pops up. It's just like, whoa, where did that come from?
The Wonderland exhibition opens tomorrow and runs through to March. For Checkpoint, ko Hamish Cardwell, tēnei.
If you're listening to that, Hamish's piece will go up on our Facebook page and online. Some of the pictures are pretty amazing. Some feedback before 6 o'clock on Pharmac switching epilepsy drugs and the coroner investigating 4 deaths. This person says, I have been on Lamictal to treat bipolar for the last 7 years, which I developed during pregnancy. I had been going well on that. Since changing to Logum for the last 2 months, I've become quite agitated, paranoid and irritable. My ruminating thoughts also returned. I'm booked into my GP next Wednesday to try and change back. I wonder how many other people changing to Logum have had similar issues with their mood disorders, this person asks. In business, we were talking about PayWave. This person says PayWave is bank greed, 10% fees to retailers. No wonder they don't want it.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with tēnei. The Commerce Minister Chris Whapfoe says messages to Jason Kerrison were untidy and dumb, but says he won't resign. Mr Whapfoe today says he got a stern talking to from the Prime Minister, but will not resign. He had been contacting op shop frontman Jason Kerrison about a family immigration issue, saying he was on it, bro. Today, Mr Whapfoe said he did nothing to advance the case and instead contacted Mr Kerrison's local MP, Matt King. He says he could have handled it better.
In dealing with Jason, I said things that were untidy and dumb, and I take responsibility for those things. I said some dumb things, but I did not do the wrong thing.
Mr Whapfoe, the Prime Minister says she retains confidence in Mr Whapfoe but expected better from him. Samoa's Prime Minister says over 20,000 vaccines have been administered during the 2-day lockdown designed to stem the tide of the deadly measles epidemic. Today was the final day of a nationwide shutdown while vaccination teams visited households to administer shots. The death toll from the outbreak now stands at 63, with 1 fatality over the past 24 hours. Tuila Epa Sailele Malia Lenga Oe says the 2-day campaign is on track, with preliminary records showing good progress has been made.
The manual records show that we did 17,551 injections yesterday, and this morning so far 3,089, giving a total for these 2 days at 20,640.
Tuila Epa will be releasing fresh figures later this evening. Out-of-control bushfires are closing in on major population centres in New South Wales. 3 blazes burning north of Sydney have joined to create what has been dubbed a mega blaze. The 3 fires have burned through more than 300,000 hectares and destroyed around 10 homes. The fire service says there are 104 fires burning across the state, with 59 out of control. Several bushfires are burning at an emergency level. Total fire bans are in place for 10 regions in New South Wales today, including Greater Sydney, where the fire danger rating is severe. Wellington police are warning people walking alone to beware of their surroundings after a stabbing in a park in Brooklyn. A woman has serious injuries after being attacked at Central Park late this morning. Her attacker is still at large and police say the woman did not know him. Police are asking anyone who witnessed the attack or who saw anything suspicious in the area to contact them. A Kudo local says the man shot dead in the town by police last night was well known and well liked. The police say the man in his 60s was shot at his home after he pointed a gun at officers. The police had been called to the house after a man had made threats of suicide. A Kudo local, who asked not to be named, says he is shocked and stunned at what has happened.
All I know is that he was a quiet person, very friendly. You know, it's a person that you would never think that would do anything like this. And like I say, you know, you just never know what's going on in a person's mind at the time. And it could be anything that's happened.
a resident of Kudo. Helicopters are airlifting 4 people injured in a fatal crash north of Kaikoura to hospital. 3 people were killed in the collision involving a car and a truck on State Highway 1 at Hapuku just after 3 o'clock this afternoon. 1 person is in a critical condition and 3 have moderate to serious injuries. The highway is closed while investigations take place. 59 bus routes in Auckland have been cancelled indefinitely over a pay dispute between NZ Bus and the Drivers' Union. Since Monday, NZ Bus drivers have refused to accept fares as part of industrial action over their pay and conditions. NZ Bus says as a result, all services operated by NZ Bus will not run from tomorrow onwards. This includes the Link buses, routes along Dominion, Sandringham, Mount Eden and Manukau roads. The state-owned oil giant Saudi Aramco has raised a record $39 billion in its initial public offering in the Saudi capital, Riyadh. The share sale was the biggest ever, surpassing China's Alibaba, which raised more than $38 billion in New York in 2014. The initial public offering will value it at nearly $2.6 trillion when trading begins, making it the most valuable listed company in the world. The share sale is at the heart of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's plans to modernise the Saudi economy. The country urgently needs money to fund large projects and develop new industries. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. Troubled American basketballer Glenn Rice Jr. will return to the Breakers lineup tonight, despite club owner Matt Walsh saying his time with the club was up. Last month, Rice appeared in court on an assault charge and the club indefinitely suspended him, with Walsh saying it would be unlikely if Rice played again. But Basketball Australia's integrity unit has now cleared the way for him to return, and the Breakers have included him for tonight's match against the Taipans and Cairns as they chase their first away win of the season. With just 3 wins in 11 matches, the Auckland club sits second to last in the Australian National Basketball League. An Australian Super Netball coach is calling for a return of the Trans-Tasman competition. Collingwood Magpies coach Rob Wright is heading to Nelson for the Super Club tournament starting this weekend, where his side will become the first Australian club to participate in the 3rd edition of the event. New Zealand's 6 ANZ Premiership teams will compete along with England club the Wasps. In 2016, the 10-team Trans-Tasman ANZ Championship was scrapped, and Wright says he misses those games as they exposed players to different styles of play and helped them develop. The New Zealand women's team pursuit has broken the national record to qualify top of the rankings on the opening session of the Track World Cup in Cambridge. That's the news.
Touted as a cure for diabetes, epilepsy and doomed New Year's resolutions to lose weight, the keto diet is taking off.
He's a changed boy. He's seizure-free and he's a lot more independent because of the diet.
This is a letter from a diabetes nurse. Anything under 40 is considered non-diabetic, so essentially I was in remission.
This week on Insight, Teresa Cowie finds out if keto is a trend or a treatment. Podcast now from the Insight page or listen after the 8 o'clock news on Sunday morning on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taumaranui, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Low cloud morning and night, isolated afternoon and evening showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms. Whanganui, Manawatu, Horowhenua, Taihape, Gisborne through to Hawke's Bay. Mainly fine, increasing high cloud tomorrow. Taranaki, Kapiti and Wellington, cloudy periods, patchy drizzle morning and night, some rain late tomorrow. For Bulla and Nelson, mainly fine, rain with heavy falls spreading from the southwest tomorrow morning. Westland, Fiordland, Canterbury High Country and Otago Lakes. Rain with heavy falls, thunderstorms at times, turning to showers tomorrow morning and clearing east of the main divide. Wairatapa, Marlborough and the remainder of Canterbury, increasing high cloud, scattered rain developing tomorrow. Central Otago, Dunedin, Clutha and Southland, scattered showers. Chatham Islands mainly fine tonight, cloudy with patchy drizzle tomorrow. RNZ National, it's almost 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Cabinet Minister Chris Whaafoy says he said some dumb things but did not do the wrong thing in his dealings with Jason Kerrison over an immigration case. The lead singer of the band Op Shop approached the minister, who's a family friend, for help after his stepfather's partnership visa request was declined. The minister's office has published the full correspondence between the minister and the musician. It shows Mr Whaafoi told Mr Kerrison he would help speed up the case, but that he wasn't able to put anything in writing. Today, he's apologised to the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, for his handling of the incident and says he got a stern talking to but won't lose his job.
In dealing with Jason, I said things that were untidy and dumb, and I take responsibility for those things. I said some dumb things, but I did not do the wrong thing. The language was loose as I was communicating with an old friend. After Jason contacted me, I sought advice about how I should deal with the matter. That advice was that I could support Jason's efforts, but I should not advocate for the case, and that his local MP should do that.
Mr Whaafoi says he didn't want to let down a friend, but should have been much clearer with him.
I became reluctant to get involved over time because of the number of messages I was receiving from Jason. Some of my responses to those messages were dumb. I was trying to let down a friend easy and not cause conflict. I should have been more direct with Jason that I was not comfortable with his messages or supporting his efforts.
In a statement, Jacinda Ardern said she maintained confidence in Chris Whaafoi, but she expected better from him. But the opposition says that's not good enough and Chris Whaafoi has to go. A short time ago, our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, spoke to the National Party leader, Simon Bridges, about the saga.
Chris Whaafoi's caught red-handed. All he has to do is say sorry and all moves on. And a government I led, Chris Whaafoi would be gone.
What's changed between now and this morning when you said to Morning Report it would be appropriate for a minister to, for example, refer someone to their local MP as he did?
That's not what's happened here. And what he's said to Jason Kerrison is that he'd speed all of this up. He had a plan and he got it moving, but that he was conflicted and so it had to be kept on the down low. Now what he's saying is, well, yeah, look, that wasn't true. That was a lie. And so, I'm not in breach of the Cabinet manual. Well, he's saying, given that he's lying about this, who knows what on earth has happened. But in Jacinda Ardern's eyes, even though he's been caught, all he's got to do is say sorry and everyone moves on. That's weak leadership.
That was Simon Bridges speaking to our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch. A doctor who's been on the front line of Samoa's measles epidemic believes infectious diseases and poor vaccination rates pose a greater challenge to the world than terrorism. Hawaii's Lieutenant Governor Josh Green heads up a team of 70 doctors and nurses from the US state. The team's been on the ground in Samoa for the 2-day immunisation blitz and to help with critical care. Their presence there is entirely funded by donations. Dr. Green says one of the local hospitals was operating at 600% capacity, and in the villages, people flocked to the vaccination teams.
We were anticipating a great deal of human suffering, and we did see that. I was also anticipating a lot of potential resistance to vaccinations, and I did not experience that at all. So that was quite surprising to me as a physician and as a government official.
So when you were moving around, because you've been involved in vaccinating people, what were you coming across? Were you seeing very ill children, or what met you in villages?
Well, yes, that definitely was the most intense moment of the 48-hour medical mission. We came into one small village deep in the jungle, and just as we rolled up, there was a man who was asking for vaccinations for his whole family very eagerly, and he said to us, but first there's a sick child next door, one of his family members, very, very sick. And so myself and the pediatrician friend I have, Dr. Sala, who was with me, we immediately went down there, and the child actually had just passed away. It was an 18-month-old child. And so there was a lot of heartache right there. And my staff member, one of my staff members from Hawaii, is Samoan, and she understood how we should grieve together, which we did with the family. And the very extraordinary part of the moment was after grieving, we also ended up vaccinating all the rest of the family right after their loss. And it was touching because they have a total of 7 children. They were very intent on making sure that no other child or family member got sick. So I couldn't imagine a more poignant moment than that. And to tell you the truth, a lot of the team, including World Health Organization and CDC and others, were quite tearful. So it was hard, and we saw a lot of that. I have to say, it's really quite extraordinary what the teams from New Zealand and Australia and the Samoan physicians and nurses are doing, because you have very, very sick children, and that's why it was necessary to all come together and immunize this country.
Any loss is heartbreaking, but it must be, well, a shock to see so many young children who are ill and dying.
It is. There was a 5-year-old in one of the villages that just looked so sad and was so sick with fever. He was still okay, and I'm positive he'll live and make it through. But, you know, in Hawaii and in America in general, we're not accustomed to people living so much out in the open and having so little shelter. And so this child who was in a fale, he just had a high fever and really was quite miserable. And like I said, he'll be fine, but he was in just the first 3 or 4 days of his measles attack. And I knew what was coming, and he's going to feel quite terrible. And it just, you know, it kind of tears you up inside. So I really feel strongly, this is my personal opinion, and I of course, live this way with my family. I feel very strongly people should be immunized. And for me, anyway, and my team, it was very important that we participate in this countrywide effort. We did not meet any resistance from my team, none. And maybe it's because people were so sick. Maybe it's because it was such a firm effort for 48 hours. But I was told beforehand we might meet some resistance, and we just didn't.
Your team, have you any idea of how many people you've immunised in the time you were on the ground there?
Well, I know that the entirety of the mission, yesterday we immunized over 20,000 people, and today I will not be surprised if another 20,000 people were immunized. So our goal was 50,000. It's actually one of the largest feats of immunization I've ever heard of in mankind. I can't believe this much was done in 48 hours. I do know that I had partners here that did 200 and 300 immunizations each day as individuals who were really going for it. So when we got to houses, in many cases, 10 or 15 people would come up and offer their arm up to be immunized. So it was quite stunning, really. And so I'm grateful to have been a part of this, and I'm grateful to see that Samoa will be healthier. And this hopefully will give a lesson to many other nations, because this isn't the only disease that requires immunizations. And honestly, from my perspective as a lieutenant governor and as a physician, I truly believe it's going to be infectious disease problems that are our greatest challenges as humanity, not other questions like terrorism or fights amongst ourselves. I think we have to be very mindful of how fast an epidemic can take us, and this is one of them. So we'll have to be careful, and people should continue to get vaccinated if we're going to be safe.
In saying that, then, what do you think of the orchestrated attempt, it seems, online to send messages into Samoa that are, anti-vax messages?
I think that's really quite terrible. I of course believe in free speech, but I don't believe in denying science, and I don't believe in scaring people under any circumstance. And so it's unacceptable to scare people. I do believe people can make their own choices for themselves and their family, of course. I wouldn't recommend not getting vaccinated ever. My children are vaccinated. I'm vaccinated. But to send anti-vax messages from another country is really quite terrible, unless those very individuals are willing to come here and suffer with the measles and see their own children get sick or die. So if they would be willing to let that happen, then maybe there's not so much hypocrisy. But for God's sake, if someone's sending it into this country with that message when they're not even living here, that's utterly irresponsible.
Had you treated many measles cases before you arrived in Samoa? Because a number of doctors, they've never actually seen a case of measles.
No, not many. I'm trained as a family physician and as an emergency room physician, and so I have seen measles before. I also worked in medical missions in South Africa and Swaziland before, so I have seen outbreaks like this, small outbreaks, rare cases, but I've never seen anything like this. I went into the small hospital, forgive me, I don't know the name of it, here on the western side of the island that the New Zealand team has been servicing this last couple of weeks. And there were 28 patients with severe cases of measles, and it was unbelievable. It was unlike anything I've seen before, for sure. The extent to which people were devastated by, measles with the rash all over their body and just high fevers, it's really incredible. And of course, we know that some strains of measles, like this one, can be really damaging. If a person gets pneumonia after their case of the measles, that's why they usually die. So very, very sick young people needing oxygen, needing fluids, needing antibiotics. The hospital was working at 600% higher capacity than normal, 600%, because there were so many sick people. And frankly, there could have been a lot more, I think, who are staying at home just because they're not as sick as the others. So, it's really an incredible feat that Samoa, as a small nation, is dealing with this epidemic. And that's why we in Hawaii just wanted to come and offer a small bit of help. A few of our doctors are going to stay on, and if people ask us to send more physicians in the future, you can be sure we will.
Given what you have seen and what you've just described in the hospital, do you fear that the death toll will continue to rise?
Well, the death toll will probably, it will go up briefly. It'll still go up probably with small numbers in the coming weeks. And then it will flatten and then drop very significantly, the rate at which people die. There will be some deaths in the next couple months, day by day, but before long, you'll be seeing that there are days when no one has passed away. And then not much longer after that, you'll wake up and weeks to months will pass without a fatality. So it will dwindle quite quickly now that we've immunized most of the country. And this will give the government a good opportunity with its public health system to get the last few thousand people immunized. This is a really good opportunity after this strong surge next week to just have a modest immunization program day to day. So not nearly as many people will die, but the immunizations take a little bit of time to kick in for everybody. So we've never done this before, where such a large percentage of the population was immunized in 2 days. So some of this is even going to be new to the epidemiologists out there in the world.
And that was Hawaii's Lieutenant Governor Josh Green, who's also a medical doctor specialising in, emergency department medicine. He's been on the ground in Samoa with a team of 70 doctors and nurses from Hawaii. It is 22 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Mums-to-be in a Bay of Plenty town say it's unfair to close their only birthing centre at short notice. The District Health Board has closed the Opotiki Primary Maternity Unit for 4 months until the end of March, saying there aren't enough midwives to keep it open. Local midwives say there are no grounds for the closure and it's going to take a toll on families. Chen Liu reports.
Opotiki woman Afina Kure's fourth child is due in 4 weeks. She was taken by surprise when she found out the town's primary maternity unit was closing down.
There was no notice at all, to be honest, due to them not consolidating with us, our people, and no backup plan, etc. We were unaware that this was even happening 2 days prior to the suspension started.
The closure from December 1st means women in the area will have to drive about an hour to Whakatane to get help. Ms. Kule says she was left with no choice but to arrange a home birth because she doesn't want to give birth outside of her hometown.
Obviously, as a hapu mama, I've had to change my birthing plan, number one. This is my fourth child, and I've had all my children at the maternity unit here in Opotiki. So it has affected me in terms of wanting to have this next baby birthed here in my own ancestral lands of Whakatohea.
Jane Curley, a local midwife, says there were no grounds for closing the birthing unit in the first place.
I'm absolutely opposed to it. We have enough midwives here to cover the unit, although the DHB is trying to say we don't. We've actually had the same number of midwives here for the last 20 years available, and we've been able to run it perfectly well.
Ms. Curley says the situation is going to be especially stressful for first-time mums who often can't tell whether they are having contractions or in labour.
If she turns up at Whakatane, is examined there, she will not be allowed to stay if she's not in labour. So you can have a situation where young mums go all the way to Whakatane only to be told they can't stay, they're not in labour, go home. They go all the way back again.
Another midwife, Lisa Kelly, says the future is uncertain.
We haven't actually been given formal notification by email from our maternity manager. So we're unsure whether we still have our on-call contract for the unit. Everything's really up in the air. No one really knows what's happening.
The local MP Tamati Kofi says as a new father himself, he understands situations can change quickly when giving birth to a baby. He also says the closure has a wider impact.
People that live right up the tip of the Cape, they have to, it takes a couple of hours to get to a Portiki in itself, and if the maternity ward is closing here, the birthing centre is closing the next year, it means that they'll need to carry on a further 45 minutes to an hour to Whakatane, to their hospital, to be able to be looked after.
Mr. Coffey was in Opotiki this morning to accept a petition which has attracted more than 5,000 signatures online in support of the birthing centre staying open. More than 40 pregnant women are said to have been affected by the closure. The Bay of Plenty DHB says it has been in discussion with health providers about the future of maternity care in Opotiki. Mo te hotaka o te ata nei, ko Chanliu tēnei.
Aucklanders' potato peels and apple cores are destined for greater things, with the council rolling out a citywide composting scheme that will see food scraps recycled into useful stuff like heat and biofertiliser. From 2021, the company EcoGas will pick up household food scraps curbside across urban Auckland in a bid to shrink the 100,000 tonnes of domestic food waste that's sent to dumps in the city each year. Auckland Council General Manager for Waste, Parul Sood, told me they've been working on it for a long time.
You know, a lot of the cities in overseas do this for many years. So I think we are a little behind in times, but it is coming to our city in terms of diverting approximately 40% of what you've got in your waste from landfill. So it is quite big.
So 40% of what people in Auckland put into their rubbish bins is food waste, is it?
That's right. It's on weight. You might not think it's that much because you think, oh my God, in terms of the volume of things, it looks little. But actually by weight, it is approximately 40% of what you're putting into your rubbish bin or bag is actually food scraps.
And so do we know what it is? Are we just talking sort of potato peels and leftover bits from the meal and things like that?
Yep, it's a mix of all of that. You know, you are preparing food, so you've got your peels and you've got your banana peels, you've got your fruit that's maybe gone rotten, but also the stuff that you've overbought and it's stuck at the back of your cupboard or in your fridge, and things like that. So it's just food that you haven't been able to consume and it goes into the bin. So the collections start in October 2021. They will be electric.
Amazing. So, can you tell us at your place, do you put much rubbish out?
So I live out west, and I've got a largish family. I put out my rubbish bin every 3 weeks. So it doesn't go out every week.
The red top bin for your general waste, you only put it out every 3 weeks.
That's right. I've got a little worm farm at my house, so all my food scraps can go into that. And it's about just thinking a little bit more when you're buying as well, in terms of not creating it in the first place.
So how do you do that? How do you manage to only fill that bin up once every 3 weeks? You've got a worm farm, but what else? Give us some advice here.
So, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I do it all right, but I try and do my best with it. So I guess in terms of thinking about when I'm buying, when I or my husband is going for grocery shopping, just having a bit of a list and making sure you're buying what you need, and then making sure you're keeping a check on your fridge as well. So it's not actually stuff that's hiding behind and you think it's gone bad and then it just goes into the rubbish bin. So thinking about all those things in terms of smart shopping is quite critical.
So use what you buy, Parul. Use what you buy.
Exactly. And one tip with fruit is something that we always think about is buy smaller quantities, because you buy more and it sits there and it's half of it is gone bad. So buy smaller quantities and maybe buy more frequently from your local shop.
Hey, so when our rubbish is collected, if you live in Auckland, your rubbish is going to be collected by this green truck. What is going to happen with it once it's composted? What's happening with it?
So the technology that we have signed up for is called anaerobic digestion, and that is something that is very widely used overseas, as I said, especially in Europe. And what that does is it actually takes your food scraps and makes a bit of and I'm going into a lot of detail, but makes a bit of a soup with it. And then that creates gas, which converts into energy, but also it creates heat, which can be utilized for any kind of a plant which requires heat. And the third product is digestate, which means it's like a liquid fertilizer which can be put on land. So it's got those three resources that come out of it.
So basically our food could potentially go back into growing more food.
That's right. That is one part of it, growing more food and providing energy as well.
Ratepayers will want to know, is this going to cost them anything more?
That's a good question, and we actually have a targeted rate for this service coming. And I'm not sure if you're aware that this service already exists, like the food waste collection system already exists in Papakura, which is 17,000 households in the city, and it costs us about around $68 per year.
And that's Parul Sood, who's the Auckland Council's General Manager for Waste. All we've got time for today. We'll catch you again on Monday.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Chris Farfoy says he got a stern talking to from the Prime Minister for what he calls a dumb offer to help a friend over an immigration matter. Samoa's Prime Minister says the country's measles vaccination campaign is on track, with more than 20,000 vaccines administered in the past 2 days. A Kudo resident says he's shocked by the death of a local man shot by police who were called to his home after he had threatened suicide. And 3 people are dead and 4 have been injured in a crash between a car and a truck on State Highway 1 north of Kaikoura this afternoon. Those are the headlines. Our next news at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every week.